Slow down, lay your burden down.
Hey, welcome to Divergent Paths with Dan Dunford. That's me. What's up? I'm realizing, I listen to a lot of different podcasts. I really need to up my game as far as the intros go and the talking by myself. I don't know. I just run out of things to say. I always end up saying the same things. But, yeah, I don't know. So, what's up? How's it going? Happy Thanksgiving week. Hope you're gonna enjoy some fun times this week. Thanksgiving, I don't know. Talking and interesting. I don't know. Whatever. It's a process of figuring out what to say in these things. This week, my guest is Mr. Ray Riccomini. He is the second trumpet in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. I've known him for 5-6 years. He is on faculty at Manus School of Music at the New School in New York. I've always enjoyed his. I was in his classes, and he runs the brass studio class over there. He was the head of the brass department for a while. Always had a good relationship with him. Have learned a lot from him over the years. But he was kind enough to sit down with me, and we had an incredible, really great talk. Really, really fun conversation. Over the duration of this podcast over the past few months, I can fall into a little bit of a anti-orchestra bent at times, and that's, I don't know that really is who I am, but it's most of my guests, previous guests and upcoming guests, they're not in, full-time orchestra positions or whatever. And that's what they've chosen to do. They do a lot of different stuff. But I thought it would be important, and really cool to have someone who is in that life and really loves it and really knows what that's like. And, Ray's been in the Met for about 12, 13 years now. And he's an incredible trumpet player, obviously. And just a cool guy to talk to. Really interesting person, and a great musician. So that's that. What else can you say about that? So there's no music at the end this week. I guess I could have put something from put a Met Opera recording on there, but then I would run into copyright issues, and I don't have any money for them to take, so I don't really want to risk it. But yeah, I don't have any personal music things coming up this week. Just a little bit of playing here and there with a few different things. No concerts though. So that's about it. Please, if you enjoy the podcast, listen and subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher. Leave some comments or reviews, or just, Facebook me and tell me what you think. I really like to hear, what people think about the show. So let me know. But yeah, that's that. Enjoy my talk with Ray. Thanks, guys. thanks for coming down to Manus a little early to do this. Let's see, move this.
Closer.
Yeah, just a little closer. I know this doesn't look like much, but you know.
That's okay. I'm good with it.
So, excuse me. It's funny when you go with when you listen to like interview podcasts. I don't know if you do that kind of thing really, but like these people who have these guests on, you can generally go and type their names into Wikipedia and you can find stuff about them. I've run into this thing where, you know, most musicians, not so much. There's a few here and there,
right.
The big guys, you know, your Joshua Bells, your you know, Bromsmans,
right.
Whoever. Well, I assumed you wouldn't have a Wikipedia page, but I typed your name into Google anyway, just to see what happens. And you know, this is right after I asked you to do it, and the first thing that came up was a thread on the trumpet forums
about a canceled masterclass.
No, nothing like that. It was about you playing piccolo trumpet with Panic at the Disco.
Oh boy, yeah, okay.
So this is like 7 years ago, roughly.
Yeah, about 7 years ago.
And the overriding comment was about you playing in long johns.
Yes.
And your overall look while playing piccolo trumpet in long johns with a rock band.
Yes.
Which, I mean, when it comes down to it, that was the last thing I expected to turn up. I just assumed it would be some like masterclass recordings or some like just clips of you playing.
Right.
So how did that happen?
So that was. There's a contractor in the city who does a lot of movie stuff, and I guess she wound up getting a call from Saturday Night Live. Panic at the Disco was the band at the time. I guess this was like 2008 or something like that.
I mean, that would have been the time for them to be a musical guest.
Right. So, and they had this big song called 9 in the Afternoon.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of trumpet in that.
A lot of trumpet in that. And in the video, I guess they are, and I did see the video before I went and played, there was... at the end of the video, when the trumpets are playing, there's these guys dancing around in the streets in these shaker hats, marching band hats, and long johns, and I guess they wanted to have that on Saturday Night Live. So I got called for that, and it was interesting. There were two other great players. It was three of us that got called, and we did the rehearsal. And it was great. My kids loved the song, so they were so thrilled. They were younger then; they were like 8 and 10, so they were just getting into that. But the call just came in, and I was like, "Sure, I'll do it." They didn't tell me anything about the long johns, and then that's what it turned out to be. So it was fun. It was really fun. I did not expect to be on TV in long johns, but.
I mean, that being said, playing with the Met Opera Orchestra, you know, it's not that uncommon to have to dress up in something ridiculous and play in front of people. A lot of people watching.
Yes,
maybe not millions of people watching.
No,
but at least thousands.
Yes,
tens of thousands over a season long period.
Right. And we have had a couple where we did Meistersinger, and in last year's season. And we had to wear costumes that basically looked like those playing cards from the Disney Alice in Wonderland kind of thing. And that was the last scene. We're standing up on this rickety thing that's about to fall, and no one could move. There were 8 of us across this little plank. But we had to play, and that was in the HD theaters. Mm-hmm. So,
great.
So that was, and I actually wound up having to do an interview with Renee Fleming and 2 of my colleagues, but I was in my costume which was a little interesting. But
well, I mean, everyone knows that life in an orchestra is super glamorous. You know, you get to be pretty.
That's true. There's a lot of that. We just finished Tannhäuser, where we got to wear these weird costumes again, and so it's fun. It's I'm glad to be at the Met because it's not like playing in a symphony orchestra, obviously, with the costumes and stuff, and the other part is our schedules are always changing, so it's a lot like freelancing. You know, it's not like you do your 4 rehearsals, you do your 4 concerts or 3 and then you're on to the next week. There's a lot of room to do outside stuff. There's a lot of different repertoire running.
Or even from a time point of view, you don't even necessarily have to be in the pit or at the hall for the entire piece.
Right. And that works for you and against you. Like last night was Rigoletto, and I was on the stage band, which is no costume. You're backstage. But that show hits for the stage band right at the top, and then 8 minutes into the show, you're done. And that's your show. That's the end. Then there's other ones that I'm trying to think. Oh, Anna Bolena is coming back, and that one, if you're stage band, you show up at like 11 o'clock at night and play the very last thing that goes on. So it's...
I mean, although I guess even, you know, that if you're a little bit late for a rehearsal, maybe you can blame the train. But if you're, you know, playing at the very end of a show and the train is running late, you're just done.
Yeah, and especially if you're on stage in a costume or something like that. Well, there's a lot of rules that we have to be there at certain times. You know, even if we play at the end, like those people that play at the end of that act have to be there by the end of the intermission before that. Right. So it winds up being almost 2 hours before they have to be there.
Yeah, I mean, so of course, I mean, a highly visible organization will have very specific things you have to follow. Yeah. One with such a, you know, a big rep to uphold.
Yes, I guess so. I
I mean, you know, so
not the Boogie Down Bronx.
That's where I live. I'm you know, 140th, East 140th.
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of people I talk to, you know, you know, oh, my dad played guitar, but you know, when you're growing up in a household where, you know, music is the profession, how does that shape? Like, how young were you when you started your lessons on whatever instrument it happened to be?
Well, I muddled around with the trumpet like in 3rd grade. My dad had an old cornet lying around the house, but I didn't think anything of it. My dad was a euphonium player in college, so brass was kind of just the way we went. I had an older brother who was a trombone player, a really good trombone player. And then you know, the 4th grade comes and like 2 or 3 weeks into school, they wheel this cart around with all the instruments and the guy comes in and says, what do you want to play? And immediately the trumpet was the one I picked. And then my dad, because he had already been working on Long Island as a band director for 15 years, probably by then, maybe 10. He had a lot of connections with other people that he set up private lessons pretty much right away. It was very soon after I started that I wound up going and doing private lessons. That just kind of continued right away. You know, it was like from there until, you know, even out of school, I would take lessons.
Then, I mean, a lot of young musicians, they kind of either, you know, you kind of figure it out as you get a little older. For me, I mean, I was like 12-ish because I started when I was 8 playing trombone, and like when I was 12, that's kind of when I was like, I figured out for myself that, oh, you know, this is something I maybe could do, I wanted to do, but like neither of my parents are musicians, have any kind of, you know, predilection for that sort of thing. So what, you know, is it more difficult to decide to go in that direction when that's all, like music is just around all the time, or was it just more of a natural thing?
I think it turned into a natural thing, but it was very much at the get-go. My dad was a very strong personality, and he kind of, you know, my parents were both very, I mean, not rough on it, but they were disciplinarians. You know, they had a way you did things, and my dad was very much like that. And so once we started, you know, there were many times. I have a younger brother who played French horn, so we had everything, you know, in the house. but all of us wanted to quit at some point or another, and we're like, we can't quit. Mom and dad will kill us.
Kill us.
Literally, that was the fear. So I think whether it was true or not, as I started to go through middle school, high school, especially in my later high school years, you start to have success in those areas maybe on a broader scale outside of just your little high school. And even though I was having some success playing, I swore I did not want to go into music. And I don't know if that was just because I didn't want to do what my dad wanted me to do or whatever it was. But I believed that was all I was good at. That I was like, well, this is quote unquote easy, right now. This is the easiest path for me to just not have to work so hard, which is totally wrong.
Well, yeah, right. Well, and at a certain point, and I kind of, I mean, you get to a certain point, and you're like, well, if I don't do this, what else am I supposed to do?
Exactly.
I have interests, but what?
Right.
I spent so many years on this thing, then like to start over, even as like a junior or senior in high school, at that point you don't realize you're young. You can pretty much do whatever you want, but in your brain it's kind of like, well, this is what I'm good at.
Right. And it's funny because my daughters, I have now they're 17 and 15. One's graduating high school this year. And I was a believer that, middle school is rough. It's a rough time where you kind of become, to everyone else in the school, somebody. You become, that's the dancing guy. That's the funny guy. That's the football guy. So I was the trumpet guy. I was a music guy. And you kind of identify yourself in that way. So, yeah, over the years, it was like, well, this is who I am, more than even that, I loved it. I did love it, and I still obviously love it. But even when I got to Mannes, I think it was not until my junior year at Mannes that I was like, all right, let's go all in on this kind of thing. Even though I was already in college, and there was like those, the options were getting smaller and that field was getting
smaller. Once you get to that point, you're kind of like, then it really is. Well, I don't have unlimited money, so I can't really switch.
Exactly, and I can't go back and take my SATs or do any of that stuff for school. So then I kind of went in on it. I was very lucky that my brother, like I said earlier, he was a trombone player. He went to Juilliard pre-college, then I followed 2 years later. So we were there for a couple of years together, and then he went on to the undergrad division at Juilliard, and that's where I wanted to go. And I didn't get in. And I was just thought, I thought I had it set. I thought I was ready to go. And I put some stuff down that I wasn't prepared to play and went in and they called that. And it came back to bite me.
Was there a little bit of sibling ragging about that?
There was. And I think back now, my brother, he like I said, he was a trombone player. He passed away about 15, 16 years ago now almost. But there was always that sibling rivalry. I always liked that competitive part. If he was going to do something, I was going to try and outdo him. And so that really drove me for a long time. And then the only school I auditioned out of high school was for Juilliard. And then that didn't happen. And then I scrambled around, and like I said, I was very lucky to run into Bill Needleman, and I didn't know who he was, but I went and I really, aced my audition at Mannes, and I had been taking lessons with Vince Penzarella for a while, and he was fantastic.
And has to be said, and pretty much everyone from the
has
past
come
30 years
through his
have come
studio.
through the studio.
Yes, anyone who's done anything, or even not, has come through his studio at one point or another. So I had studied with him at a summer camp through Juilliard pre-college. I really AC auditioned, and Needleman still tells me the story. He said that he thought I was I had gotten into Juilliard, and he was afraid I was going to go. He didn't know that I hadn't, and so they gave me a very generous scholarship, and that was kind of the way it went. And while I was, it wasn't exactly my first place I had hoped to go, it wound up being the best place for me. He was a real mentor. Needleman was in kind of pointing me in the directions I needed to go that turned the light on upstairs. And I've told those stories in brass class.
Well, and it's funny because when you would tell, well, now that this is his second year of no longer being on faculty, I was actually in one of his last classes, like the last semester he was teaching. I was in his classes, but he's like a legend has grown up around him among recent students who don't realize that like how he used to be a more prominent figure in driving how Manus went. So it's just like, oh, he's the asshole ear training teacher,
right.
Which I always enjoyed his classes because I can handle it when he tells me that I should just jump out a window and kill myself.
Right.
I think it's hilarious, and I would respond in kind, but in some of the less, well.
Yeah.
But I've realized, more recently through things you've said and through things other people have said that like he was a really important part, like a huge part of what Manus was.
Yeah. When I was there, I think I got there in '87, and there was kind of I never knew exactly what happened, but there was a coup at some point in 84, 85, I think it was, maybe been a little earlier than that, maybe even, where there were certain administrators that decided we're taking the school in this direction. And so the entire time I was, well, no, not the entire time, but almost the entire time I was at Manus, Needleman was the associate dean. And so he controlled all work study, orchestra assignments, everything that went through. It was him. And he had his group of people that, he relied on. And similar to the way he was in those classes, there were people that he was drawn to and was like, those are the guys I can joke with and get a little edge in my humor. And then there's those other people that just didn't even show up on the radar. Yeah. And luckily I was the former, I guess.
Yeah.
He was sent, and I still see him every couple of weeks. We have lunch or dinner or whatever. But he still has he has a great vision of how things should be, and he doesn't sugarcoat anything. And
that's true. I don't know when I am subject to different teachers or observe other teachers how they teach. I think there needs to be a balance struck between like that get in your face, accept nothing but the best, and then the kind of like encouragement part, so someone doesn't get discouraged with what they're doing. And it seems that like most students that I speak to about that kind of thing mostly just want the encouragement part. I mean, and I think that if you only can do one or the other, that's counterproductive for a lot of students. But like that asshole that get in your face is really important.
I agree. I think the thing that is lost, and I don't want to date myself here, sounding so like I'm not that old, but the shift has been so dramatic in my eyes over the last 15 years of students and things. I always thought especially, and Bill Needleman was the person that really opened my eyes to it, was that if someone's taking the time to really get in your face about something, the students don't realize that that's because you can handle it, because it's out of respect. It's you need to do, it's calling you out on something. And I've said that in brass class many times. I've said, if I didn't think someone could do it, I would just ignore them.
Yeah.
And just say, you know what, I'm not going to rail on you in this class because I know you can't do it, and it's going to shorten my life and not, you're not going to benefit.
Yeah.
But what you were saying about the encouragement versus the in your face, it's funny. I thought when you asked me to do this, I thought this would go to this subject at some point.
Well, yeah. I mean, of course. I mean, I know a lot of people who have studied with you, and certain people say certain things and other people say certain things, and I've observed how you work with the trumpet players. And yeah, I mean, sometimes you're just like, no, you need to do this. I'm not going to babysit you about this. You need to do it. But on the other hand, I mean, obviously I've never taken a lesson with you, so
right.
So I can't speak to that. I can only speak to what I've seen. But it's something that I appreciate, and personally, but I came from a military background.
Right.
That's
so you have discipline in you.
That's
right.
how I grew up. So
right.
I'm familiar with that, and that's how I sometimes what I need. So I'm interested in that kind of thing because I don't really teach. So
Yeah, and honestly, like I said earlier, my parents were about discipline and I mean, we always had to go practice, and there were many times, get in the room and practice. You got to practice, and they were on us a lot, and we'd go in there and just blast notes out and sound awful, and on purpose to piss them off. And it's important though to like, I don't think that I am someone who was born like raised in a disciplined background where that's kind of what you observed every day. But I learned that if you really want something, you've got to have discipline. It's got to be that way. And I, again, like not dating myself, but I feel sometimes that students these days, younger players, maybe not. If you're a professional, you know what to do. And I'm not saying like young kids who are in their 20s that have jobs, they obviously know what to do. But there are many, many students that have been told they're great, that they can succeed, that they, those things and those kind of things. And they're then, I don't know, I see them leaning towards it. Well, this is kind of that birthright. I'm going to succeed. I'm going to get that because I've always been told I was good enough.
Yeah.
And it's not that, and I try to, convey that in the brass class with when I give that whole lecture about, the journey and all that stuff. But
probably heard that lecture a good 30 times.
Yeah, you've heard that many times. Well, now it used to be just once a year I'd have to give it. Now I have to. Like it's like it's a bi-weekly, kind of thing, or bi-monthly, I guess. It's tough because you know how hard it is having gone through it. When I got out of school, I knew, when I got into Manus, oh, you're so talented. You're so, you could, it was a lot of you could, if you did this, you could do that. It was never just like, you're going to be fine. You're going to be great.
That's one of the most frustrating things to hear, at least on my end, as like a young musician, having that potential talk. Like, oh, you have the potential. You could go and do this. You could go and do that. But it's a lot of responsibility.
It's a lot of responsibility, but to do the work, that's that's what I try and say when I tell the students that I think that the students a lot of times they want that hand holding, that shoulder to cry and saying it's okay you're having a bad week, or it's okay, and it's not okay you're having a bad week because someone else is having a great week because you're having a bad week, and I think it's really important to stay on people, to pull themselves up out of what it is they're doing or not doing, and take that personal responsibility for it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the only. I mean, with the exceptions of some people who are just ridiculous. I mean, even those people work hard, but
they work really hard.
But all of us aren't that person. So we have to work all that much harder to achieve. To fulfill those like glimmers of things that the teachers see.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was one thing I was really interested to talk to you about because you finished. You did your undergrad at Manus. You did your master's at MSM.
Yep.
So when you finished your master's, what
93.
93. And you won the Met job in 2003, 2004.
Yeah.
So that's and you said you did the 1 year the New Jersey Symphony, but that's a
substantial gap.
That's a substantial gap. Now, like, I don't know, it's different for everyone, but like right now in like the trombone community, the guys who have the big jobs, you think of guys like Weston Sprott, Nissan Haraz, just Joe Alessi for that matter.
Right.
Damian Austin to some extent. Like Weston, he won the Met when he was 23. Joe, like,
I think even younger than that. I think he was like 21.
Really young. Yeah. He was still at basically.
He was still at Curtis.
Right. Joe like won that San Francisco job when he was 16 and just bounced from principal job or bounced from orchestra to orchestra until he settled in New York. Like, there's a lot of guys who achieve success, pretty consistently, pretty early, and of course. That's a tribute to the work that they did as students and the teachers that they had. I mean, you can't take anything away from them for that. But I'm, interested in a guy like you, or another example is like Mike Roylance up in Boston. He won that job a lot later, and you won your job a lot later than some of these other guys.
Right.
So like what did that 10-year gap like do for you as a trumpet player? What were you doing then?
Okay. Well, I mean, the first thing it did for me to wait that long, it was actually interesting study in contrast, because I won the Met job in November of 2004, and Weston won his job in May of 2005. So it was literally within 8 months of each other, or 7 months of each other. And, I would be lying if there weren't times right afterwards that I thought, I can't believe I waited this long to finally get over the hump, or that it took me this long to get over the hump. And when they announced that I was the person, I remember sitting in the locker room at the Met, waiting. It was me, I was there, and Guy Piddington, who's now the second trumpet player in San Francisco. He was also a Phil Smith student, and he hadn't studied with Penzarella, but we were both Phil Smith students. But he was, 10 years younger than I was, and I can remember he was number 4 and I was number 6 in the audition thing, and we did the finals. And I remember sitting there, and I had done it. I'd been in that time frame, that 12 years of being out of school. I think I've been in 17 finals, and so I was actually sitting there waiting for Bob Cyranek, the personnel manager, to come up and say the committee decided, and they picked number 4. And I had run the script through my head. I was like, that's what's going to happen, and I need to be prepared for that. And I was just staring at the floor, and I saw his feet come through the door, and he said, the committee has voted, and they decided, and they picked number 6. And my head snapped up, and I burst into tears, and that was it. And then I came downstairs, and the committee wanted to meet both of us because it was really close. And I walked in, and because I had done the year before, I knew a lot of the people that were on the committee, and I just cried. I probably cried for like 3 days, like a baby, just any time I thought about it. And then to see 7 months later when Weston came in and won, I was so excited for him. He was clearly I was on the committee, and I knew the first round. I was like, that guy. I remember he was number 38, and I was like, that guy's got everything. And he came down, and they were like, you won. He came downstairs, and he was just like, thanks. And at that moment, the thing that I took from that gap was, I remember saying to myself, I would never trade those 12 years of struggling to have that little bit of a reaction compared to the reaction that I was allowed to have later. But during those 12 years, what did I do? I did a lot of stuff.
I mean, well, obviously you made the finals of 17 different
Yes, yeah, but I was lucky. Out of school, I was struggling for money really badly. In fact, I worked up near MSM. There was a place called Broadway Copy Shop. It was right across the street from MSM. And I had been successful at MSM. I had played first on everything and done really well. And then to have to go back the next year and be working at the copy center while guys I had played with were coming in to get was quite humbling. But I was lucky enough to get an audition for the New York City Opera touring company, which they used to run. And it was basically from January until April, you'd do one-nighters you'd be on a bus for, 3 months, and you would just play. We did Madame Butterfly every night. We'd drive on the bus for like 4 hours, play the show, get up the next morning, get on the bus for another 4 hours.
It's just like a typical Broadway touring company,
Absolutely.
except it's New York City Opera.
Right. And so at that time, they had announced the associate principal audition in Chicago. And so I just used the time on the bus, the time between when we got there to the hall, and just practiced all the time and listened, did more listening of orchestral music than I ever did in my whole life, and got out and made it into the finals of that Chicago audition. And that first summer after school, or a year after school was out, made it to 3 separate finals of pretty big jobs, but didn't close the deal. And then I was so desperate for money. I took a job as a bellman in a hotel at the Essex House Hotel. And that lasted about a month. Once they put me on overnights, I couldn't make that. And that was rough.
Yeah.
But then I wound up getting a job as a concierge at the Ritz-Carlton, which was on Central Park South, which was a great job, great people. And I don't know how I backed into it, but, instead of working like Saturday and Sunday, I was working Monday through Friday, 7 to 5 or 7 to 3, whatever my hours were. And they would give me time if I got called to do something. And with the success that I had, success, quote unquote, at auditions of making finals, back then, Broadway was really moving in a direction where Disney was just coming in. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the shows were being gotten by classical players. They were very classically slated shows.
Well, I mean, you look, you look at those Disney books. I have Mary Poppins in my bag right now, or Tarzan. Like, you've got your jazzy parts, but it's basically just a really hard first trombone part.
Exactly.
A really hard, really long first trombone part.
Yeah. So I was lucky that was just timing. It was just so. Back then there wasn't any social media. There was none of that. So, but
business cards and Rolodexes.
Exactly. And so I wound up getting called to sub on a lot of shows through the success or, finishing strong at auditions.
So, I mean, did you enjoy doing that, or did you kind of just view it as like, well, this is what I have to do right now?
Which part?
The subbing and the playing, all these different things.
I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved the audition circuit. Mm-hmm. I thought it was, especially there, mid-20s and no kids. And right. I was just, traveling around the country and taking audition here, taking audition there. And just to see, it became like a small validation of, okay, I can do this, Mm-hmm. So I did not have the confidence in myself that I could do it outside of that. It was always like, all right, I'm going to try, I'm going to see. But I didn't really believe that. I don't think I believed I deserved to win. Mm-hmm. It's maybe self-sabotage or, whatever. But I love the Broadway scene. I miss it. And that's why I say when I say that, one of the best parts about the Met is that your schedule changes every week. The operas change every night. Mm-hmm. Everything's different, and it gives you room to do outside stuff. So it really does feel in a lot of ways, still like the freelancing, mm-hmm. Which
with the security of knowing your show's probably not going to close.
Exactly. That's yes, you have a safety net there.
A friend of mine, the trumpet player who just finished his performance diploma at MSM this past year, 26-year-old guy. He did Radio City last year, and he's doing it again this year. But he immediately, when he finished, he got Dr. Zhivago. He was playing lead on Dr. Zhivago, and which is amazing. And he was getting like lead pay, doubling pay, all this stuff. And then it ran for 46 shows and then closed. It's like you get to this point. Unfortunately, as a younger player, there's if you're getting that early, there's going to be more stuff. Right. You're going to be fine. And
yes.
Of course he is.
Right.
He works down at Josh Landris. He's great. But it was just kind of like, oh,
yeah.
that's so discouraging in a way. You
Yes. And people used to ask me when I was freelancing, because I continued always taking auditions, even when, there were times where I was working 40 hours at the hotel and then come home, eat dinner, and then go to an 8:00 show. And basically there were many, like we would try and plan a vacation. And we go away on vacation and I'd get a call for, hey, can you do these 4 shows? I'd be like, we're going home. And, that was just the way it worked. But through those times, I would always practice, always try and take these auditions. And not, there are very many successful people on there that as they get older in freelancing that can do it. But I always thought that I was the kind of player that I didn't want to get to this point in my late 40s or, into my early 50s of like my kids, I can't send them to college because my show just closed. So that was what always pushed me to keep taking the audition, that came up. But no, I at that time, I loved all of it. I loved working in the hotel. I met great people. And freelancing, those guys play great. And sometimes I get a chance to play American Symphony Orchestra. And a lot of the people that I used to play with are there. And it's a real treat to get to play with those people.
So, is there something to, you're traveling around taking all these auditions. Obviously you say that you loved doing that. Was it the almostness of advancing here, advancing there? Was that what kept you going, or did you just love orchestral music that much?
I think I did love it that much. I love orchestral music. And as I listened more and heard more performances and was around it more and more, it just kind of grew. I think there was something competitively that you just like to get in there in a ring and just be like, all right, who's going to stand?
Yeah.
And there were some great people out on the audition circuits back then. There were some really not so nice people. So it was nice to show up and be advanced and see those guys and not.
Well, and if you're doing it that often, you're often going to be running into the same guys on all these auditions.
Many times. There was like a huge kind of clique of people that you knew you were going to see them, and we would all say, "Oh, see you at the next one," and we'd all leave. But I wouldn't trade anything for that. To have to give up that experience, I think was great. It did get not so fun later on. I was 28 or 29 when I had first daughter. And then I just turned 30 when we had our second daughter. And at that time I was like, there's no money coming in. Freelancing was getting less and less. Yeah. And so I actually packed up the horn for a year and put it away and went in. I had a friend who was a former trumpet player who worked at Columbia in their network office doing, I think at the time, Columbia had the largest private computer network in the country. And so I was learning Cisco routers and switches and installing that stuff. And I did it part-time. I say I quit. I did quit. I didn't take auditions. I didn't, practice so much. I still did some shows. And then, and that was all with the hope that I would get a job there and that's the field I would go into, that I could have steady money. For some reason, the guy who ran the department and a full-time position came up, and somehow that guy knew. I don't know. I hated him for the moment when he did it, but the full-time job came up and he's like, I'm not giving that to you because I don't want to give it to you and then have you quit on me and say you're going back to trumpet in 6 months or, and with all the, and I was so angry. And then my second daughter was born in June of 2000, and we still kid her about it, and I hope it doesn't cause too much damage. But she was a challenging child, and I was working. By that time, I had moved on from Columbia, and I had a job at an investment banking center in their IT department. And my daughter was so challenging for my wife, and I was gone from like 6 a.m. till 9 p.m. And it lasted about a week. And I remember sitting down with my wife. She was like, I can't do this. I don't know what's going to happen. And I said, look, I could quit the job and go back to trumpet playing and really try and give it a go. And that's what we decided. We both looked so relieved when that came out. And then the next morning I went in and I quit the job. And I walked out of that job and called everybody I knew on Broadway. And then it just kind of steamrolled. It went from subbing on shows to getting called for my own show, to winning the job in Jersey, to getting asked to do the 1 year, to playing at the Met. So it rolled really fast.
That's a pretty interesting like inflection point. Like that's your life could have been like so much incredibly different if you don't have that conversation with your wife.
Yeah, it was
after a week of working at a bank.
Yeah, it was really. I will never forget it. And then the other thing that I swore I would never forget to be appreciative of the opportunity to work in music. It's. For me, I can only say it's so much better than working a day job. And even though the hours can be long and stuff, it's and it is hard work, as you know. You're in it, you're doing it.
Yeah.
But it's not. You get to play an instrument. It's not. My friends from high school are like, "What is it like?" And I always say, "Well, you remember those times in band when we would have like really fun time? That's what it's like. Yeah. It's like So you're working hard, you're improving your playing." But when it's happening, it's fun.
So I've generally the people I talk to are either younger musicians or musicians who are like, the whole point of this show is kind of like to spotlight people who are taking a little bit of a different direction, rather than rather than putting all their eggs in winning a job,
right?
At an orchestra. I thought it was important to because because I've been here, in these schools for long enough, I have access to some of, to guys like you, to guys like Wes. I know some of these guys who are doing it. What I frequently, if you ask some of my colleagues that I frequently rail against, I enjoy playing in orchestras, but I don't, I would hate doing it every day. Of course, I can say that now because I'm a 25-year-old kid,
right?
With trying to make enough money to pay my rent. But that being said, it is getting, there are so many more people graduating every year. There's so many incredible players on. If you just look at brass, there's so many, and even though there might be dips in quality from year to year at different schools, whatever, there's still so many more high quality players that are going. And, maybe in 1985, you'd have 30 guys show up for a job at a big, at maybe not like one of the top five, if you will, but at like an Indianapolis or San Diego or something, you might have 20, 30 guys show up. And now you've got like 90.
Right.
And for a place like the Met or New York, you're getting hundreds and thousands of tapes.
Yeah.
And someone has to go through and listen to all of them. But it's so much more difficult. And I'm curious because a lot of times you still go into these conservatory setting and you have teachers pushing in one direction. And I don't want to place you into that kind of a mold, like a mold that I'm making.
Right.
But I'm just curious, how you balance that in your teaching, when it is more difficult and it takes even more work than it has in the past. Well, that's debatable. That's definitely debatable. But it's just, it seems harder. Maybe it's not harder.
Right.
It definitely, it's a lot more daunting of a task.
Right.
But we're still pushing. It seems like there's still that push. Like, no, you go get a job in an orchestra, go get a job in an opera company, go get this. I'm just curious, what you think about that. What you kind of think about that idea when you're shaping young trumpet players.
Well, I think it's the hard thing for me, and I've said this to students in there, it's what I do. It's from the minute I got to, decided that junior year, or even before that, I knew it was going to be something orchestra based. I wasn't interested in solos. I tried the brass quintet thing. I did I could not do jazz to save my life. I just didn't have a feel. I don't have a feel for it. I love it. I can't play it though. And that was just where it was going to be for me. It was going to be in an orchestra. That's kind of what fell naturally. So, I've had students that have wanted to explore I want to play this, I want to play that. And the first thing I say is, well, I'm not sure I'm the person for you. I don't want to push somebody in a direction to do something they don't want to do, but similar that you wouldn't go to a college that has a terrible business school for business.
Right.
You might, if you don't want to play in an orchestra, then I'm probably not the person you would want to study with. That's where my I bend towards that direction. And I wouldn't know how to, I don't have a lot of solo rep experience. I've not played a lot of these big concertos or, don't have chamber music experience. So it's always been orchestra. And that's, so it influences my teaching in that I try to be straight up with the students about where I'm coming from. I think that sometimes there are students I've had in the past that try to convince me that that's not the only way, but I'm not, and I say, I'm not the one who's taking a lesson here, And it's like, this is your money. This is the way, it has to be what you want. And I might not just be that, I just might not be that person for you. So I think there are people, similar to what you were talking about, that playing improv before, when you were saying that, Dave is the guy if you want to do that. If you were studying with almost anyone else, you probably would have been completely unprepared for that moment. And so, I think that there are it actually all leads back to that speech that I always give in the brass classes, that, I think that students can think that, well, I want to do this, so you're going to teach me how to do that, and not really, take into consideration that, all of these teachers have their own paths that they've taken and explored the venues they were interested most in, and they can teach those. They can teach from their own experience. I can't teach someone, how to incorporate electronic music into solo trumpet playing. I'm not.
I might know who you're talking about.
I can't. It's that's just not the way it goes. So I wish there were more thought. I hope, my hope is that there students can find their way, and then maybe it's a young thing as I get older, I don't know, but I hope that people get more out of that earlier, out of that egocentric where it's like, what I want to do is what everybody wants to do, kind of thing, and understand that some people aren't interested in that or don't know how to help you with that.
Right. I think about this when I look at what I'm trying to do with my own career, and I mean, I play with, 3 or 4 different orchestras at, different times, more or less throughout the year. And I do this and that and the other thing. And what I end up coming down to is like, well, why would I want what I don't understand from someone who is saying, trying, like you said, trying to convince you that something else is, what I come down to is like, well, why wouldn't you want to do all of that well? I mean, there are challenges to like, that's another thing. Like, really, you have to work really hard to be able to do orchestra one night, big band the next night, play with a rock band, play a show, whatever. That's a completely different type of work, but it's just as much work. So, like, you're not ducking out on any work by not going towards an orchestra. Like,
absolutely. If you're improving your playing, you're improving your playing.
Yeah, like you're still going to be working just as hard. And I don't understand the idea of like cutting that part completely out, like saying, no, I'm never going to do that. I'm like,
yeah.
What happens when you need that $250 check to pay for your food for the next week, and you're just like, no, I'm not going to I'm not going to do Brahms 2.
Right, and because that's not what I like. I mean, even now at this stage, where I have a great job, and I'm not in a situation where I have to run around, but there's nothing that like standing on the stage of Saturday Night Live in long johns. It's like I could have said, well, I'm not doing this, and walking, but it was fun. It's interesting. It's a different venue to play in. Mm-hmm. So, I've done that where I remember there was a rock group that one of the guys who lived at the Dorm Manus back in the 80s. He had a rock group, and I wound up playing with him. And it was just stuff that it was just different, but it was an experience. Mm-hmm. And you just take, you kind of, it's like when everyone's, oh, I'm such a whore or whatever, you have to make the money. Yeah. And it's not only about the money, because some of it is not enough to make a difference, but you have to make connections with people. It is such a people-driven industry that, there is a lot to, especially if you're trying to be your own independent contractor. A lot of it is who you know. Mm-hmm. And why would you cut out an opportunity to maybe run into somebody who you'd be like, hey, I've got this festival, or I've got something, I've got this little ska band and I want you to play. Oh, great. And that was from taking Brahms too. Yeah. That kind of thing. It's a people-driven industry. You need people. Everything is. You need to make connections.
Yeah. So hard. So many nights of not sleeping. So many nights hanging out in dark rooms of bars and stuff. Yeah. So tired all the time. Poor me. But so now you've been in the Met for 12 plus years, mm-hmm. and like you keep saying, you love your job. It's a great job, and you from the outside, it sure seems like it. Money, the benefits, the
security,
exactly. It's a really challenge for me trying to be a freelancer. I'm just like, I want something that's just secure. I don't want it, but I like doing the things that aren't secure. So I just from like a everyday kind of a standpoint. When I think, and this is partially my ignorance about being in a position like you have, but in my brain, when I think of myself in that situation, I would worry about becoming more of a technician and less of a musician, and that's ridiculous to say because the Met is filled with incredible musicians.
Right.
All of them, they've all put in the work, and but at a certain point, everyone's at such a high level. I would think that, at some point, you're not going to, of course, any job, you're not going to love it every night.
Right.
You're not going to love it every night, but you're keeping yourself at such a high level. I'm just wondering how you just go from day to day without letting it just become your job.
I think a lot of people that I know at work use their teaching. They really get into that, trying to invest in the students. Mm-hmm. And I like having outside opportunities. If something comes up, this year is actually pretty good year. I got to play with Jersey Symphony again in September. And
wasn't there the Scheherazade
thing? The Scheherazade thing. I got to do that a couple weeks ago. This weekend, I'm playing the Haydn out in New Jersey with a small orchestra out there. It's an old friend of mine. Mm-hmm. And I'm going down to Charlotte for New Year's Eve and playing with them for their New Year's Eve concert.
Good orchestra.
And they have a brand new hall. And so I think overall, yes, the job itself, there are definitely nights you're like, oh, and especially, maybe someone like me. I went to school, I did pre-college in the city I started in 83, 84, and was in school, graduated with my master's in the spring of 93. So that's 10 full years I was in the city at least once a week, and from 87 on living in the city. And then there was another 11 years after that, and that I was freelancing and doing whatever. Never once subbed at the Met before I got that 1 year. I did maybe one show. And only went and saw one performance at the Met. Opera, I still say, my mother-in-law and I argue because I was raised, a Penzarella guy, a Phil Smith guy. And so I spent many nights listening next door to the Philharmonic, but I never enjoyed opera.
Really?
Never. It is an acquired taste. And I have it now. I like it, and I love, obviously the melodies and the music, and even something like now we're, starting Lulu tonight. It's challenging in that I've never performed it before, and it's something new to learn. But I think more than anything, than what the job is, you just have to love playing your instrument. And if you love playing your instrument, you'll find something, even if it's that you use the breaks that you have, or you come in early or you stay late and you're practicing and you're improving on your instrument, all that stuff makes the job easier. And I think when we go to, when we come out of high school or, go into college and decide to pursue this as a path, for a career path, I think no one really goes in, or at least I didn't, with I want a job like that. I dreamt of the day that playing my instrument would be so easy and I could do almost anything I wanted on it and it would be fun. Like that would, that's the work that I've tried to do. And then the rest of that goes, then that bleeds into the other stuff you're doing. But I think that it's that you have to really enjoy playing the instrument more than anything. The rest of it, then it is just a regular job.
Yeah.
It's just like anything else.
Yeah, doing it to pay the bills.
Exactly.
But I mean, it's such a unique. And you've mentioned this, and I've heard you mention this 1,000 times. If I've heard you mention it once, but we get to play, like, stick a brass instrument on our face and just play it. And get paid, like someone's like, here's some money.
Right.
Thanks.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's an incredible position to be in.
I remember after I started my undergrad at a private school, a little private liberal arts college in Indiana, and studying with Jim Kraft, he was in the national second trombone in the National Symphony for 30 years, and he retired to Indiana, and I studied with him. And I took, after my first year of college, I left and just I didn't play for a year. I joined the Navy and was on active duty in Virginia Beach, just like doing, not music, just doing intelligence work. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know
right?
that.
Yeah. And I had my trombone with me, and every once in a while I'd pull it out and kind of like, whatever, in the barracks. And but after that year, as much as I loved doing this, like, like I said, both my parents were in the Navy. It was, I had lots of family in the military, and I loved it. Loved, the imagery intelligence I would do. I loved looking at these things and finding those like little puzzles and all this stuff. But when it came down to it, when I finished and went into the reserves, and I moved back to where my parents were living in Florida at the time, I moved back, and I was just like, I gotta, and I immediately started playing with community bands, and I immediately started playing, working on rep again. I immediately started doing all this stuff again, and went to a summer festival that summer because that's what you do. That's what I do. Like, I tried doing something else.
Right.
I legitimately tried and considered not doing music again. And it was just, when it comes down to it, and that's kind of how I think about what you're talking about is.
And that's exactly what I'm trying to convey,
And I think a lot of students don't realize that, they haven't. I was fortunate to have that experience where I did try to do something else. But if you don't, if it's just kind of like, oh, I'm playing, and you forget that you could be doing something terrible, something really miserable, something else.
You could have to be doing something miserable.
You could be back in Iowa being an insurance adjuster or whatever. Yeah. I don't know why that was the example, but yeah.
But that's an interesting point you bring, because I remember, I always say to students, I wasn't the best student. I wasn't a bad student, but I wasn't the guy who was spending 6 hours a day practicing and doing that. You know, I enjoyed my time in school and I did what I needed to do to keep at a certain level, but it wasn't in me at that point to, you know, ramp it up and be like uber competitive. And I can remember that first September when I was finished with my master's degree. And I remember still so distinctly looking at the trumpet case and thinking, this is the first day that I open this case because I want to open it. And I remember saying, you don't have to open that case if you don't want to. This is completely your choice now. And I opened it and things started to happen. And I remember, you know, maybe I didn't act on all the information that I was given by teachers, but I remember absorbing it.
Right.
And I still said, you know, when I got out of school and I finally made the final decision, like, here we go. This is kind of, I remember visually in my mind, it was like walking to the backyard and opening up this garage door where you had this mountain of information that you had accrued over this time.
And it's all dusty.
It's all dusty, and you're like, all right, that's everything anyone's ever said to me. And you walk into the garage and you go, that's garbage. All right, I'll keep that. Maybe I'll use that later. And you're basically sorting stuff out, and you would make your routines and you know, this is how I'm going to do this.
Yeah, I found it interesting. I mean, it took me, because of different things, it took me 8 years to get my bachelor's degree, just to get a bachelor's degree. And I'm, you know, holding with that, not getting any other, not spending any more money on education for a while. But probably sometime in the 6th or 7th year of that, I mean, you know, I feel like I'm a pretty good player. I can do a lot of different things. You know, I'm not the best at orchestra playing. I'm not, you know, that kind of thing. But I have my things that I do well. But I remember in that 6th or 7th year, I'm like thinking to myself, you know, I go to these master classes and I listen to these teachers and I listen to this and I'm like, I haven't heard a thing in probably 2.5 years that I hadn't heard before. Like even like this trombone thing that Manis did earlier this year.
Right.
Great guy, you know, all these incredible players. And I listened and I'm like, okay, yeah. I mean, I've seen master classes by Joe Alessi before. I've heard Vienna trombones play before.
Right. I've
talked to Weston. I've talked to Damien. I've taken lessons with Dave Taylor for 5 years. I haven't heard anything new. But my playing is not getting, you know. And then I realized, you idiot, you have everything you need. Just friggin' do it already.
Yes.
And honestly, it was my. You know, my second year at Manis, it was after a year I took off to go work at a nonprofit. I came back to Manis, and that's when I realized that. And that's when my playing started getting better. Like, that's when the shift happened, and I started being reliable, and I started, like, brass classes went better, low brass classes went better, lessons went better. I started doing more things, and I was just like, should have just pulled it, you know, like you said, this garage door. You should have just started culling through that a lot earlier, and this would be, you know, but you have to come to it in your own way, you know.
Right. Penderella always used to say that. He would give the information. That's what he always called himself. He always calls himself. He says, I'm just a provider of information. I'm not your teacher. I'm not, you know, I'm a provider. And he would say, you take what you want, and then you throw away what it is you can't use. But it's exactly what you're talking about. It's that, you know, his number one thing was like, you can't, if you yell at a baby, it's not going to walk, right? You can't just make it walk. It's going to come to it when that connection's made, then it happens. And, you know, for you, it happened at that time. And then for me, the ultimate connection was when, you know, 11 years after I got out of school, that I was like, all right, I think I can finally do this. So it happens. Hopefully it happens, you know, like sometimes it doesn't, you know, and that's something else that I talk about with my colleagues at work. And I've tried to say it without being too rude in brass class. But, you know, I always refer to it as like, it's kind of Darwinism, you know, in the brass world. It's like, you're not all going to make it, you know, it's not. And I think that.
And that's not a reflection on you as a person.
It's not.
It's just maybe it's not what you're going to do.
Well, I mean, and I tried it. Panzarella was very good at saying, it's like the way you're acting, the way you're doing things, the approach you're taking, whether it's your political in the music industry, your playing approach, whatever it is, they all have paths. They all lead you on a certain path, and all those paths have a certain length to them that you might not know. And that's why you rely on people that have done it, have gone through those, paths. And, part of what took me so long was that I tried many different paths and you maybe would get you halfway there, and then you'd have to go back, and then you'd get on the next path. And I think that, I even said to students, I said, you have to stand in the mirror and you have to say, I suck.
Yeah.
I suck. And it's okay that I suck, but because I won't always suck. But I
have to do something about it.
But I have to do something about it, and that's the hard part that some students just won't realize. And that's part of it, it's, that's part of the Darwinism of it, that they're just not going to get it.
Yeah.
It's not that they're not good enough or they're just not going to figure it out. My dad told me a story when I was really young, and I was kind of screwing around a lot with trumpet and not really taking things seriously. And he used to tell this story that just stuck with me. He said, this 5-star general dies, goes up to heaven, and he walks in and he sees God and he says, I hope this isn't too golden, it's more of a funny story than anything. But he said, he was very full of himself and he said, well, who's the greatest general ever, expecting him to be like you are, And the story when he told it to me was that God takes him, puts his hand around his shoulder and leads him to the edge of this cloud and points down to this basically destitute, homeless guy and says, that guy's the best general. He is, but he didn't do what he's got the potential to do it. He has all the tools, but either he didn't do it or he wasn't given the opportunity or he chose a different path. And I think that, people think that, especially students these days, think they're entitled to it, that I want to do it, so I'm going to do it. I'm going to be able to do it. There are those people that will themselves to do it, but I don't see that a lot.
Yeah. Well, on that depressing note. So what shows does the Met have coming up in the next month and a half? I'm not sure when this is going to come out, but
next month and a half. Well, tonight we're starting Lulu, so we've got 7 or 8 of those. We've got
those poor old people.
Yeah,
they're going to be listening to it.
I have to say, I was dreading doing it, but I'm really liking it. So it's fun and it'll be interesting. Then we've still got Turandot's, which are always a crowd pleaser. Bohems are coming. Fledermaus, a lot of crowd favorites coming up, which is good in time for the holidays. Yeah. So we've had a couple of runs where we've done something maybe not so holiday oriented that is not. But this year I think they got it right with trying to attract people and running Rigoletto and stuff. So.
Good times.
Yes.
Well.
Yes.
And that's what 4 times a week.
Well, yeah. I mean, right now because there's so many stage bands, we're all doing 6 and 7 shows a week.
Woo,
yeah,
that's a lot.
It's a lot. I don't see my family a lot.
Oh no.
So that's okay. We'll get together.
You can't feel your face a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much.
No, I'm glad you asked. I appreciate it.